minutes.
Minister Haidu, it's good to see you again. You said back in March that the purpose of the Indigenous Business Directory is to demonstrate the Indigenous identity of those on the list. Is that still your position?
The Indigenous Business Directory serves as a tool to ensure that Indigenous business have economic opportunities to benefit from the
Sorry, can you just answer
Canada.
the question, though? You said in March that the purpose is to demonstrate Indigenous identity. Is that correct?
The list helps ensure that Indigenous businesses have an opportunity to compete for procurement
Minister,
contracts.
could you just answer the question? That's what you said in March. Is it still true?
The business,
Is what you said in March still true?
The Indigenous Directory is there to ensure that Indigenous business and Indigenous economic development can be furthered by the spend of the Government of Canada.
That's not the question and not the answer you gave in March. But in any event, you said in March that the purpose of the directory was to identify indigeneity of those on the list. Why was the ArriveCan contractor Dalian Enterprise removed from that list?
I don't have specifics, but I will turn to officials.
I'd like your answer, Minister. We heard from the officials on this last week. You weren't at OGO. I'd like to hear from you now. Why was ArriveCan contractor Dalian Enterprises removed from the Indigenous business list? Can we assume that it's because they were determined not to be Indigenous, or is there some other reason they were removed from the list?
I can't make assumptions on administrative decisions of the department, but what I can tell you is that if circumstances change and ownership structures of businesses, then they very well may be either added to the list or removed from the list.
Okay. Is Dalian Enterprises an Indigenous business?
We don't work with Dalian Enterprises. We don't have contracts with Dalian.
I know, but you did. They received over $100 million from the Government of Canada. They were part of the ArriveCan contract. They were able to get it on the basis of an Indigenous set-aside through a joint venture with a much larger company, even though they're only a two-person company. Again, could you clarify why Dalian Enterprises was removed from the Indigenous business list?
We no longer have Dalian and joint venture companies on the list, and Indigenous Services Canada doesn't have nor has had any contracts with Dalian.
But why were they removed from that list?
The officials have indicated they were suspended on March 12th due to questionable factors. And in fact, their suspension was announced on March 1st, so they are no longer on the list.
So I'm aware that there's some questionable factors involving Dalian. That's why I'm asking questions about it. Could you clarify, please, if they were suspended or removed on March the 1st, what was the reason they were removed?
So I will just reiterate that the purpose of the list is to support...
Minister, I want you to answer the question. Why were they removed?
So I will just reiterate that the purpose
Minister,
of the list...
you will answer the question. Why were they removed?
I have a question for you, Mr. Genius.
There may come a time when that's a possibility, but it's not today. Maybe the Deputy Minister can answer if the Minister doesn't know. Could our Deputy Minister share with us
Mr.
why
Chair,
they were removed?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that.
Talk happening here, and the members asked a question, and we should give the minister an opportunity to answer it before jumping into the next question. So I'm gonna restart the time.
My question is simple. Either the minister can answer it, or maybe the deputy minister can answer it. Why was Dalian Enterprises removed from the list?
Mr. Chair, through you, I've given an answer to that question, and the list is
you
not
haven't.
a permanent list engraved in stone, as the member would know. Certainly,
why were they removed from the list?
Certainly, that list is something that is reviewed as per the request of other departments. The list exists. Let's remind members to ensure that economic development opportunities are there for Indigenous businesses.
Thank you, Minister. Again, this reference to economic development is completely different from what you said when you appeared in March. Your officials testified before the Government Operations Committee last week that they were removed because of reports in the Globe and Mail. Can you confirm that the decision to remove Dalian from the Indigenous business list was based on things that your department read in the Globe and Mail? That's
So
what your
through you,
officials
Mr.
told
Chair,
us.
that member may not think that this is about economic development, likely because his party has never focused on economic development for
Minister,
Indigenous
nobody
peoples.
is fooled by this.
But that
I
is
asked
the
a
purpose
simple,
of the
clear
list.
question.
The list is there to make sure that Indigenous
Minister, nobody
businesses
is
have
fooled by
opportunities
this.
to
I asked
compete
a simple, clear question,
for contracts.
and you're not answering it.
There's too much crosstalk that's happening right now. It makes it very difficult for the interpreters to do their work. We've had numerous warnings and directives about this, and so I just want to again remind members not to have this kind of crosstalk.
I agree. Could the minister answer the question, please?
And so with that, I am going to restart it. So there's about a minute left.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to you for reminding the minister. Minister, it's my time. Very, very simple question here. Were your officials correct when they told the Government Operations Committee that the decision to remove Dalian Enterprises from the Indigenous business list was based on reports in the Globe and Mail?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Indigenous business list is an important tool for the Government of Canada to meet its procurement targets, something that I will note under the previous Conservative government they didn't pay any attention to.
Thank you, thank you, Minister. You haven't answered a single question that I've asked in the entirety of these 6 minutes, but I'll ask you one more. Since you have now established that Dalian isn't an Indigenous company, and since they got over $100 million in contracts from your government under Indigenous set-asides, will you expect a company that was not Indigenous, that got over $100 million in Indigenous set-aside contracts, will you expect them to pay back the money that they received?
So, Mr. Chair, I think the phrase Indigenous set-asides is a misleading phrase, and I don't expect anything else from Conservatives who have no idea how procurement works and no idea what procurement targets mean.
You know so little about your file.
That,
you have not answered a single question that I have asked in 6 minutes. You haven't even attempted to answer a single question that I've asked in 6 minutes. And you have nothing but insults for other members rather than answers about your disastrous record of Indigenous procurement. You should be ashamed of the job you've done.
Mr. Janos, your time is up. I'm going to give the minister just an opportunity to respond to that one.
Well, that member should be ashamed for not understanding that Indigenous business has had a hard time competing for procurement with the Government of Canada, and that the work that we're doing to ensure that Indigenous business has an opportunity to benefit from the spend of Canada, well, I would say that that's the kind of activity that would be at risk under any Conservative government, and we would see cuts to any kind of approach. In fact, I would imagine that member would call it too woke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Genuis. Mr. Schmiel, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Minister Hajdu, as you know, friendship centres are a crucial part of the Indigenous landscape, and their core funding is set to expire. What assurances can you give this committee that they will receive an answer before March 31st?
Well, thank you very much through the chair. And I'll just say that we've worked incredibly hard to support Indigenous Friendship Centres, and we're very proud of the relationship that we have, and we'll continue to be working with them to make sure that they can continue to deliver the services to urban Indigenous peoples.
So we have a positive answer here? It's,
I can tell you that this government
sure
has been very supportive of Indigenous Friendship Centres and will continue to do that. It's actually kind of exciting to hear a Conservative member talk about core funding. And
I'm glad you're excited,
I'm really
I'm excited
to
because
hear
I
that
also want
that's
to
your
talk about
vision.
Indigenous procurement, which is actually
I'll look forward to your support of my budget letter.
We'll see about that. Indigenous procurement. So a few months ago, you had talked about the Indigenous Business Directory being one that determines whether or not a business is Indigenous or not. Now, today, you were saying it's to help create jobs in the Indigenous community. Regardless of your stance that has changed, it looks like we have a new company here, the Canadian Healthcare Agency, that has managed to secure funding over $100 million that meets neither of those criteria. Why?
So let me just be clear that the Indigenous Business Directory is there to support procurement from Indigenous businesses. That is the entire purpose of the list.
So how did this Canadian Health Agency
get in? And the value statement behind that list is that this government believes that Indigenous economic development is incredibly important, and that First Nations Indigenous partners have not had the same opportunities to participate in the procurement of Canada. And so to reach the procurement target, we support different departments to understand who might be
Perfect.
eligible for being considered indigenous.
That's great. So the Canadian Healthcare Agency, it meets neither of the two changing statements you have made. How did they continue to get additional contracts from the federal government out of the Indigenous procurement angle when they were not Indigenous majority owned? How did it miss that?
So there are, as I would say, the list is curated to make sure that it includes people's companies as those companies change in formation. So certain companies may have Indigenous partners at times and may reform, and the Indigenous partners may sell their shares. I'm sure you understand this. I understand the Conservatives are the party of big business and understand how business works, but you do know that businesses change their ownership structures and
over $100 million to a company that checked
I will say that this particular business
neither of those boxes.
has also provided important health services to First Nations for First Nations people in community.
Mr. Chair, I've raised this before, and I don't think I'm the only one that has this challenge, but anybody wearing a headset, including the interpreters, can't follow when there's more than one voice over the microphones. Hopefully we can find a way to resolve it, because I can't follow what's going on with what's going on.
Thank you very much for raising that, Mr. McLeod. You're absolutely right in this. With the crosstalk that's happening does need to stop here. So I'll just remind all members for those with challenges hearing as well as with those that, or for our interpreters, just consider their health when you're considering talking over another person in this. And I have paused the time. There is another 2 minutes left for Mr. Smale, and I'll pass the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So at 2016, this company had an audit that showed very clearly that none of these boxes are being checked. So given that the AFN at their another committee's meeting have talked about most of these Indigenous contracts have gone out to shell companies that are not Indigenous owned, nor are they creating jobs for Indigenous people. How do you continue to stand behind this program?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, I've been clear that the program is currently, considered under review with First Nations partners about how to better deal with the challenge of proving indigeneity. And I'll just say this, proving indigeneity is deeply rooted in a colonial structure of deciding who's Indigenous or not. We've been working with a number of Indigenous business partners, including a number of esteemed individuals to decide how best to move forward. But what I will say is this, and if I could finish, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to pause again here. We just, Mr. McLeod just brought this point up. This is going to be a problem, and this very much needs to stop. So with that, I'm going to pass the floor back to Mr. Smale. You have about 50 seconds left.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. How many businesses have been removed from this list?
What I can say, Mr. Chair, is that this list provides a very important tool to the Government of Canada to ensure Indigenous economic development continues to be driven through a procurement process. And I want to quote Philip Ducharme. So how many have been removed?
Just a ballpark.
I'd like to quote, Mr. Chair, I'm looking for your direction. You'll have to.
I'm going to pause again here.
She's not answering the question. I only got 50 seconds.
There's about 25 seconds left. I want to give Mr. Smale the opportunity to ask his question and for the minister to answer it.
Okay. Now, the Canadian Healthcare Agency, can they still apply for contracts under this program?
Well, any company can still apply for contracts, but they would not be included on the list as indicating that they are an Indigenous-owned business.
So just since 2016, then?
What I would say is that indigeneity and capacity to procure from the Government of Canada are two separate considerations, and they would not be counted as an Indigenous business if they're not on the Indigenous business list. And I would say that it's important to understand that businesses can change in ownership, and if that's the case, or if a business is flagged, as Dalian was by Procurement Canada, as needing to be removed as a result of significant security status breach, that those things would be immediately acted
Colleagues,
on.
I'm going to step in again here. The time is up. That's actually much exceeded the time, but again, I just want to remind members not to have this crosstalk.